and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding. I run the centre, but I'm also an author. And I'm getting very excited because shortly in November, we have the return of David Tennant as Doctor Who for a brief stint as the Doctor again, and bringing back Catherine Tate, who was one of the funnier of the companions in her role of Donna. And so David Tennant is holding the role until Ncuti Gatwa is taking over to be the next Doctor. I don't know that much about Doctor Who other than being just a very keen watcher of the programme. So I have brought along to the podcast two experts, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So starting first with MG, would you like to say a little bit about you and Doctor Who?
Yeah, I'm MG Harris. I'm a mostly children's author, and I've written a time-travelling adventure series called The Joshua Files, which was definitely partly inspired by my love for Doctor Who, and another action adventure series based on a sort of idea by Jerry Anderson, which is called Gemini Force One. And my first contact with Doctor Who was probably when I moved to Manchester when I was a little girl and started watching Doctor Who. Not really understanding it at first, but because I wasn't speaking and didn't know English. But then when I did learn English, it was my favourite show from straight away. John Pertwee was probably the Doctor at the time, and it very quickly became my favourite programme. And when I was about 8 years old, a neighbour who used to write for the Daily Express, she managed to get a letter I wrote published in the paper, and it was about Doctor Who. I was complaining that Mary Whitehouse, should not be basically telling people that Doctor Who was too scary. I was only 8 and I loved it, even though I had to watch behind the sofa sometimes. Most recently, I've written and published a Doctor Who book called Doomsday Extraction Point. And Doomsday is a whole kind of side series that just has come out over this last summer. And we'll talk about that later, but I've authored that book.
And we're also joined by Steve Cole. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Steve, children's book author also, and editor as well. And back in the late 1990s, I was the editor in charge of BBC Books Doctor Who output. And since 2017, I find myself as consultant editor to the BBC Books range of Doctor Who output. So I get to work with everyone putting out all sorts of titles, whether it's the big coffee table books or the Target novelizations or brand new novels, or indeed novels written by stars of Doctor Who as well. My relationship with it goes back right to the start of my existence, I think. My first memory is of watching Doctor Who in 1975 as a little 3-year-old. And I've watched it ever since. For some reason, I didn't grow out of it. I understood that people were supposed to do that, but I stayed with it right to its final episodes in 1989, and yes, then helped it through those wilderness years in print, looking after video and audio as well, and finally writing novels for Christopher Eccleston's Doctor when it came back, and onwards since.
Yeah, that's actually that sort of the break from 89 until it came back. There was a Paul McGann film, wasn't there? And then it came back again with Christopher Eccleston. And I think the timing there for our generation is that it came back when a lot of us had kids. So there was the thing of sitting down again with the next generation to watch it together, which was, I certainly remember. But my Doctor, I think I do remember John Pertwee just, but I think I really started to understand the programme with Tom Baker.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, so he was sort of my Doctor. Mm-hmm. I do remember one absolutely terrifying experience as a child, that I went to a Christmas party. My dad was in the police, and there was a police family's Christmas party, big thing, in some London venue. And they thought to entertain the kids, they had a Dalek at the bottom of the stairs.
So
and
scary.
I was absolutely terrified. I didn't want to go in the hall. The whole party was just, I thought it's going to come in an attack, because at 3 or 4, whatever I was, the idea of the Dalek as like a fun thing that you walk past was just, terrifying. So that's one of my abiding memories. So it certainly had the power to scare, definitely. So It's fascinating that the series has spawned a sort of world around it of books and what have you, because I know that's happened for other outputs like Star Trek and Star Wars and other things, rather than being an IP that then gets turned into a TV program. So shall we just have a quick look? Because I know the books follow different doctors, but should we have a quick look at all the different doctors? I think there are now, if you count David Tennant again, I think there are now 15, roughly.
That's right. And he isn't the 14th Doctor, so you have to count.
Yeah. So going back to the past, who was the very first, for those who are a bit...
William Hartnell was the very first Doctor Who, way back in 1963. What's interesting about Doctor Who is that we got this reputation as being very patrician and very, the prevailing sort of like dominance of what, but it actually started off very differently. With the very first female producer at the BBC was in charge of it, and the first director who helped translate it onto the screen was Anglo-Indian. So and very, very young, because none of the fuddy-duddies at the BBC really wanted to have anything to do with this. So it became the brainchild and the sort of gravitation point for a lot of young, energetic, zeitgeist-busting people. And I think that infuses Doctor Who with an energy right from the start. The Daleks came along in the very second story. So at the end of the 5th episode ever made, you've got a Dalek sucker stick straying into shot, and they kind of became synonymous ever since. Probably without the Daleks, it would never have taken off. But the producers didn't want Doctor Who to be about bug-eyed monsters and aliens, and so they were desperately against the Dalek storyline, which they thought was everything iffy and bad about science fiction. Whereas, in fact, it was the success of the Daleks literally overnight that made the show's fortunes, and made fortunes for the BBC in terms of merchandise sales. So they left Doctor Who to Verity Lambert and her team pretty early on, and it kind of blazed its own way ever since.
And William Hartnell played it like a grandfather. He was a grandfather in it, wasn't he? So
he was, yes. Again, people say, "Oh, Doctor Who's is this sexless, ageless man," but he's very clearly set up as having a granddaughter right from the start. We know that he's from another planet, but we don't know anything else about him. All the stuff about Time Lords and his home planet of Gallifrey didn't come along until right at the end of the 1960s, 1969. With Patrick Troughton's last story. Patrick Troughton being, of course, the second Doctor Who, a rejuvenated version of the first with a completely different personality.
So I've heard him referred to as like a clownish Doctor Who. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Yeah, William Hartnell, who returns later in one of the first joint Doctor Who episodes in the early 70s, says that John Pertwee's the dandy and Patrick Troughton's the clown. So
exactly, yes, he was, and he had a much more sort of softer approach. William Hartnell could sort of like, stare and bluster and be very gruff, but Troughton's Doctor was much more kind of playful and basically lulled his enemies into completely underestimating his powers. So he was very comedic, but also very, fierce in his mission to defeat the terrors of the universe. Because the Doctor goes from being someone who doesn't really want to get involved in the events of things and is very worried about changing history, to basically being someone who stirs things up and changes status quos all over the universe, which is why eventually the Time Lords catch up with him and exile him to Earth and turn him into John Pertwee, the dandy, as you mentioned. Yeah, and there's something of the Mr. Toad about John Pertwee, isn't there? Even down to driving a little car. There's a sort of... Yeah, he does have his...
sort of slightly zany aspect to him. MG, you said he was your Doctor Who, so how would you characterise John Pertwee?
Well, I wouldn't say it was the first one I started watching, but I don't think I really understood Doctor Who because I was very young until sort of the last season of John Pertwee, probably. I remember the one that had the Green Death. Is that the last season?
Oh, it's the end of his penultimate season, but yes, it was.
Yeah. So that's when I was starting to pay attention. And if you remember, because he was exiled to Earth, all of those early adventures took place on Earth, so they were just, Earth-based. And so when it started to be about sort of, going to outer space and stuff, and I mean, that really surprised me because that wasn't the concept that I had of the show.
That's really interesting, isn't it? They did it to save money on alien planet sets, yeah. And
but I just thought it was set on Earth, and it was, I thought he was part of UNIT. I thought it was basically a show about you. So I do remember really liking Joe. But when I go back and watch those episodes, they're not quite as good as I remember. So I think probably I more got into Doctor Who properly when I was really understanding, who he was, and that he was a time traveller who wasn't actually trapped on Earth anymore. Yeah, although I was quite cross about, when Planet of the Spiders happened and he regenerated, because again, I didn't know that he regenerated. So I was like, what's happening? What's happening now? And then there's this new guy with the weird scarf, and
I think it was good that
when you
Sarah
don't know that that's happening.
No, because Sarah Jane was there as continuity, wasn't she? Did you like Sarah Jane?
I loved Sarah Jane. Who doesn't love Sarah Jane?
Well, exactly, yeah. I think she really must have helped a lot of people cope with that trauma of John
Yes, I think she definitely did, yeah. I was quite upset when Joe wasn't in it anymore. So when these things are not something that you expect, they are. And you're a child, they're a bit of a shock. But
they are, yeah.
I think some of the best writing in Doctor Who comes in the John Pertwee, season 12 and 13 with the Philip Hinchcliffe period, where you've got just absolutely brilliant writing. And of course, David Maloney, who then went on to produce Blake 7, he's got a big hand in that. So I kind of like, and Terry Nation is still writing. Because I'm a big fan.
Yeah, there's a lot of personnel crossing over from.
There's a lot of, so Blake 7 kind of came out of that era of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
We need to keep going because we've only reached number 3 and we've got a long way to go. So we've got Tom Baker, who in a sense combines an element of the dandyism of John Pertwee with his long coat and his scarf, but with the sort of, in fact, actually, he's like an amalgamation of all of them, because he's got a sort of clownish, dangerous, zany rather than a clown, I think, energy to him. But he also has an element of sort of gruffness to him. I think he's less safe.
Yeah,
as a person than, say, the John Pertwee.
That's a good call. I think Tom Baker kind of wanted to emphasize the alien qualities of the Doctor, and that he wouldn't always respond as a human would respond to something. So if someone died being crushed by, a robotic Egyptian mummy, while Sarah Jane is there feeling terribly sorry for the poor chap, there's Doctor saying, well, I told him it was no good. I told him that, this would happen, And she says, oh, sometimes you're not. And he says, human? Because, of course, he's not. He's seeing the wider picture that the entire world is going to die unless in this case, Sutekh is not stopped. So he's always got his eye on the greater picture. Although he defends humanity, the collateral damage is something that perhaps seems to matter less to him, as long as he gets the job done and saves the planets. And he sends himself up a lot, and it's basically this bohemian dilettante running around, having a wonderful time, saving planets and answering to nobody. So he was a great anarchic presence, and hugely inspiring.
Yeah, definitely anarchic is perfect for him.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. They make it super simple. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with coverage options tailored to your choices. Plus, you'll see which discounts you may qualify for, like the online quote discount or savings for paying in full. In fact, 99% of Progressive Auto customers earn at least one discount. See if you could save when you switch to Progressive. You'll feel good about making a savvy choice. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little extra cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
I have the impression, I didn't check before we came on the call, but he did serve quite a long time as Doctor Who, didn't he?
7 years, yeah. He was the longest.
Is that the record? Is he the longest serving?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that fits with my impression. And then, of course, he hands over to, where do we go now? Peter Davison, of course. Yes, how could we forget? Peter Davison. And that was the shock of choosing a much younger, it was a rejuvenation, literally, of the Doctor Who. And I do remember there being quite a lot of controversy at the time, similar to what happens when Matt Smith took over from David Tennant, that they went young. And when you think of what had come before, it was even a bigger shock because they've come from quite an old grandfather to being a quite dashing young man. In fact, I remember he was being very attracted to him, a bit of an idol for us little girls. So what kind of qualities? I think of him as young, caring, sort of more softer quality?
He kind of ran around. It felt like events were getting away from him the whole time. Tom Baker always felt like he was kind of in charge, but I think Davison's Doctor seemed a lot more vulnerable, and I think that was
I think that period goes through a whole kind of ensemble, bit like with 13.
Jodie Whittaker.
Yeah, that he most of the time he's with quite a bigger group. He's got 3 assistants or 3 companions, and so you've got more of a kind of family feel to the show at that point. And I think he relies on some of the others.
Yeah, and of course it went twice weekly at that point. It was almost within the soap opera slot that was to come. I think they were using Doctor Who to trial drama in a twice a week slot, because eventually, of course, EastEnders would take over that positioning. But it was a big shock to move Doctor Who from a Saturday and sort of like stick it on twice a week midweek. It meant that Doctor Who was only on for 3 months of the year, so that was a big loss to someone like me who was like used to having it on once a week for 6 months. That was I felt I was losing a lot of Doctor Who, even though it was about as much. It was over so much more quickly. You had to wait. You had to wait in those days for these things to come back.
Yeah, well, we do now, don't we? Though everything is always available at all times. So, and then we go to the next Baker, who is Colin Baker, if I'm getting this right. Do correct me if I get this wrong. And I don't think he was the Doctor for that long, was he? A couple of seasons?
Yes. It was a difficult time for the show because Michael Grade, as controller of BBC One, postponed it, put it on hiatus for 18 months. So, and, cited too much violence, and there was rumours of some personal antipathy towards the production team and to Colin Baker as the Doctor. Colin had a plan to make his Doctor, who was, quite, again, very irascible and alien at first, to sort of soften him up over several years, which unfortunately didn't come about because, as you say, he only did the 2 seasons, and at the end of it was basically told he had to go and make way for a new Doctor. So it was not amicable in any way. And Sylvester McCoy came along in 1987, and there was no real regeneration scene for the first time in the show's history, because Colin Baker quite rightly felt, well, I'm not coming back just for a couple of episodes to be killed off. I need to find new work, So it felt like Doctor Who was becoming, a bit mired in too much real world stuff around that time. The fantasy had worn off, and it had become, it seemed like it was less popular or not being watched for the right reasons by, I don't know. It just felt like it was dwindling a bit. It was a sad time, I felt.
I have to admit, I don't think I watched very much of the Sylvester McCoy season, because I particularly the whole Trial of a Time Lord season, I just did not like that at all, which was the last Colin Baker. And I just thought, oh, for goodness sake, So after that, I was only watching it sort of sporadically. I really liked Ace, I have to say. I did like her, but I was kind of checking out by then.
Yes, it was. I think it's difficult because there's that. I remember when Sylvester McCoy came along, I think I was 16 and, discovering Girls. And for the first time, I think is that season, I very nearly forgot to tune in, which I found a very shocking event, which rocked me to my, philosophically, it rocked me to my core, It's
only happened to me then. And one time later, when I'll tell you about it later if we get to it. But yeah, that was the only time I kind of stopped actually going, oh, it's time for Doctor Who, let's watch it, or taping it or something. I was just like, if I see it, I see it,
Yeah, I think it seemed less essential perhaps, and it was scheduled by that point opposite Coronation Street, which is kind of the kiss of death, because Coronation Street was
And I watched Coronation Street in those days.
Well, yeah, so I think a lot of people did. More people did than Doctor Who, sadly. So it went right back down to sort of like 4, 3, 5 million people watching, and it just wasn't enough to justify continued production. And by then there was only 4 stories a year. It was about 14 episodes a year. So it was very much a shadow of its former self. Creatively, it was doing new things. It was just there wasn't the audience wanting to watch. So it was kind of a bit of a sad mismatch, really. As the 80s play out, it does sort of go into a pattern, not of creative decline, but certainly of popularity loss.
And Sylvester McCoy, I think we're back with the more clownish Doctor again, a bit like Patrick Troughton. People probably know Sylvester McCoy from when he appeared in The Hobbit. No, was it The Hobbit? I think he was in the Hobbit films, wasn't he?
Later on, yes.
As Radagast, one of the wizards. And he's very good at sort of physical comedy. and a charming sort of performer, but it was definitely taking the Doctor away from a figure of authority to something much more fey. And I think that that drifted quite far from the original premise, I think.
Yes, it did go overtly comedic at times when they tried to. Ironically, Sylvester McCoy's Doctor becomes quite dark in his last season in terms of being like an arch manipulator.
He becomes very pessimistic, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
And brooding.
But I actually heard Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy recently referred themselves, they were contrasting their performances to Peter Davison's. I think Colin Baker said, I was a custard tart, and McCoy said, I was a custard pie, compared to Doctor Who, which is quite a sweet summing up of their different approaches.
So we'll just touch very lightly on, there's a Paul McGann film, and Paul McGann...
Handsome Doctor.
The handsome Doctor.
Handsome, snogging Doctor. I mean, that caused some shockwaves at the time.
Romantic Doctor. Byronic Doctor.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
Very much so, yeah.
I have never seen the film, so I'm not sure what I'm missing.
I think it's fascinating, really. I mean, it's made in America. It was a co-production with the BBC, so it does feel more American, definitely, because all the cast are American. Well, those who aren't Canadian pretending to be American.
And that's where they break with the set design as well for the TARDIS, isn't it? That's where they kind of have a leap, and you're like, whoa,
It goes a lot more Jules Verne. I mean, it's kind of tragic they didn't get to go to a full series. I know that. I came to Doctor Who professionally in the wake of the Paul McGann movie because, 1997, the year after, it still wasn't certain that Doctor Who wouldn't come back. So BBC Books took over the publishing of the original novels at that point, and I became their editor. And we were hoping that it would come back and be a huge hit all over again. But as it was, there was longer to wait until Doctor Who did come back, led by Russell T Davies, and launching in April 2005.
Yeah, so let's pick up there. So this is probably where many of the people listening to this, they probably have seen most of these we're going to talk about now. So I've lost count of which number Doctor we're on. But
Number 9.
Number 9, thank you. Number 9. So the choice of Russell T Davies, I don't know what he had done before. What had he been writing before?
Clear as Boat, in which was a
second Colin as well.
character.
Yeah, he'd done all sorts, yeah.
But not known for science fiction.
Coronation Street as well.
He wasn't known for science fiction, and this was the amazing thing, because people were saying, why would you want to go to something like Doctor Who, which was largely languishing?
He was a fanboy. He'd been a massive fan when he was a kid. I think he'd even written fan fiction, so he was a fanboy, basically.
He wrote one of the original Doctor Who novels for Virgin Publishing as well, so he was, he'd always been a fan. But I think professionally it was like, well, if anyone can bring Doctor Who back as a kind of like a way to reinvigorate the Saturday night schedules and to get all the family watching again, which of course Doctor Who's purpose used to be. It was there to bring all the family together, ready for the rest of the lineup on BBC One. When you go into the Generation Game or the Two Ronnies or the Duchess of Duke Street or all these old shows.
Oh, crikey. These are blasts from the past.
Yeah, but we hadn't had anything like that for a time because Doctor Who had dotted around all over the schedules. So when it was back on a Saturday and then it would run into the National Lottery or to Strictly or whatever else was going to come on, it became very quickly a very strong part of that. And I think parents rediscovered the joy of being able to sit down and watch something with their kids and everyone being glued to the screen. It was a lovely time.
But the Eccleston Doctor, number 9, as I now know, I think he really did take a step away from the other Doctors in that it's the first modern one. All the others had an element of retro about them. Their clothing referring to different periods, longer lines, sort of Victorian frock coat type dresses, Edwardian gentlemen, Victorian. They had the sort of air of the past about them. Whereas the Ninth Doctor comes in with his leather jacket and sort of modern skinny outlook, northern accent, and suddenly you feel, of course the Doctor can regenerate as somebody who's a contemporary and not from the southeast.
Exactly, which was, or Scotland, which was the only other place.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of Russell's genius in that, was to take, it's an absolutely modern take on it. There's no even though he's using like past monsters, he uses the Autons who launched John Pertwee's first story, but there's no knowledge of that required. All you find out in that story is that there's this mysterious alien who can travel in time and space. He tells it all through the point of view of Billie Piper's Rose. So it's a very modern character presenting her outlook, and he was drawn into the story just like the audience is. So, and soon discovers, how dangerous it is and how exciting it is. And the audience, discover that with her. So he by making it so accessible and by absolutely positing the Doctor as a no-frills northern force of supernature, really powering through adventures, in just a leather jacket and a t-shirt and jeans, he doesn't need a frock coat. He doesn't need, so many of the trappings that he acquired over the years were kind of like cut away. And I think that helped the program resonate with a brand new audience.
And we must sort of do a nod here to Billie Piper. I think she was so excellent in the relaunch because she felt like a person who you might know, whereas the other companions had been, I suppose Sarah Jane was a bit like that as well, but there had been quite a few singular choices in
higher concept companions. Yes,
high concept. Thank you. Yeah. But she worked in a shop and just seemed like an ordinary girl. She had her family,
yes,
convincing family, and a boyfriend. So it felt like this could happen to you, and that was it.
Exactly it.
The equivalent of going through the wardrobe as a kid. It felt like that you could be the Doctor's companion. Yeah,
and I think by seeing the effects on her family and by sticking with those human points of view, it made it so much more relatable to a wider cross-section of the public than ever before. With Russell's era, you'll notice that humans feature in pretty much every story. So there's always a human point of view. And also very rarely do you cut away to shots of monsters talking to each other, explaining the plot to each other. You don't get, piles of walking latex hogging the camera. It's generally told through, a human perspective, which again just makes it that much more relatable and believable, I think.
I don't know if it was in the first series or when she's with David Tennant, but I remember a very powerful storyline about her and grief, trying to change history because of her father.
Yes, that was with Eccleston, called Father's Day, written by Paul Cornell.
It's an amazing story, and it's so profound.
Yes,
you don't often go to Doctor. I think this is where Doctor Who changed for me. I remember it scaring me before, and I think in the 2000s it started moving me. There are several episodes I can say, I found that really moving. The tears well up, and actually getting that emotional response from the audience is amazing, I think.
Yeah, well, I was upset when the Dalek was had to kill itself in the first
great episode, the Dalek.
Bob Shearman wrote Dalek, and it's an absolutely beautiful episode. And who would think? I remember Eccleston going on Jonathan Ross's chat show and saying, you will. It's a tearjerker, and everyone making fun of him, saying, "Well, how can Daleks be a tearjerker?" But if you watch that episode, it's beautifully done.
Yeah,
and it is very sad, the tragedy of this Dalek. It makes you realise that
but the Daleks
have feelings too.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Villains aren't villains to themselves. They have their own purpose and their own mission, but they see themselves. Every villain sees themselves as the hero in their own narrative. And if you can't do what it is a Dalek does, then that's a tragedy you're going to feel if you've been touched by Billie Piper, as that poor Dalek was. Clearly, there are consequences.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers Podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. They make it super simple. Pop over to Progressive.com, Answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with coverage options tailored to your choices. Plus, you'll see which discounts you may qualify for, like the online quote discount or savings for paying in full. In fact, 99% of Progressive Auto customers earn at least one discount. See if you could save when you switch to Progressive. You'll feel good about making a savvy choice. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little extra cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.